Professor Layton teaming up with Phoenix Wright was bound to happen eventually, but I don't think anybody expected what we got. Did it end up being a good game? Well, in my opinion, yes. Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is obviously a crossover between Capcom's Ace Attorney and Level 5's Professor Layton. It was released in 2012 in Japan, but the rest of the world had to wait 2 years after getting Dual Destinies to get their hands on an official English version of this game. Since it's not digital only, players could literally get their hands on it, but at one point, it seemed like we wouldn't get this. It was all up to Level 5 and they didn't have any plans at first. However, they had a poll asking fans which of their Japan-only games they'd like localized, and the crossover was what won the poll. In the end, they did an outstanding job with the localization. Well, Nintendo and Level 5 did. Capcom wasn't involved in the game's localization at all. Unlike Dual Destinies, there are hardly any typos, and it's available in more than one language. When you first start up the game, the only thing you can do is create a save file. After the file is created, we see a scene with a man with a young girl in a car speeding away from something. In the end, the car crashes, and the only one to escape unharmed is the young girl. Soon after, we see Herschel Layton and his self-proclaimed apprentice, Luke, in his office, and they're talking about witchcraft. Then we see Phoenix on a plane with his assistant, Maya, who just had to be herself. This is when we find out that Phoenix is on some kind of attorney's exchange program and isn't supposed to defend in court officially. Once the game goes back to Layton's office, the professor teaches us how to play his portions of the game. Because this game's on the 3DS rather than the original Nintendo DS, the game is on the top screen for the 3D effect, much like the previously released Professor Layton the Miracle Mask. Plus, I couldn't imagine playing an Ace Attorney game almost exclusively on the touchscreen, or not really have the options to use buttons. Anyways, you can either use the touchscreen or circle pad to move a magnifying glass around, which you use to examine stuff. Unlike other 3DS Layton games, it will sparkle when you hover over a hint coin. Hint coins are currency that you spend on puzzles when you aren't sure what to do. You can even use them in Phoenix portions of the game, so that's cool. When there's even more detail to an area to examine, the magnifying glass glows blue and you can zoom in to get a closer look. And to be honest, it's not used a whole lot. On the touchscreen, there's a move button, which will bring you to a map where you can move from one location to another. The button on the other side of the touchscreen will open the professor's trunk. In there, you can view the mysteries that have been recorded and if they've been solved or not, journal entries, save the game, view important items, view puzzles, or even play one if it's been cleared, and adjust sound options in the game. In the bottom left corner, you can use the memo feature, where you can write or draw stuff. Honestly, it doesn't have much of a use outside of puzzles. The puzzles in the game are probably the most important part of Layton's portion. If you're not smart enough for most puzzles, you can just quit and come back later. Be careful though, puzzles that are required to progress won't let you quit. If you mess up too much and want to start over, well, you can. You could also write with your stylus using the memo feature if you can't get the information through your brain alone and need some kind of visual. Lastly, as I brought up previously, you can spend coins on hints. 3 normal ones and a super hint, which costs more coins. For the most part, Layton's gameplay features aren't anything new, but things are different for Phoenix. While the courtroom gameplay is mostly the same, there are a couple new things. First of all, there's cross-examining multiple witnesses and having to find contradictions between testimonies. Because multiple witnesses testify at once, the other witnesses will occasionally react to whoever is talking to you, and you can choose whether or not you want to ask someone why they reacted the way they did. Some say that it's too easy, but that's not 100% true, as you've got to decide when it's appropriate to bug in other witnesses, or in some cases, you have to think about who to ask. There's also the inclusion of the Grand Grimoire, which you can present pages from in much the same way you would present evidence. Another difference would be the court record profiles. No ages are given for any of the characters, so you don't know how old anyone is unless they explicitly say it. The courtroom is very important in this game considering the kind of trials held there. Witch trials, which are what this game is about. At the beginning of the game, the young girl, whose name is Espella Cantabella, was running away from witches with that older man, who ended up in the hospital. Layton and Luke agree to help her, but unfortunately she gets kidnapped. Luckily, they find and rescue her, but unfortunately she is unable to stay with them. Then the professor and Luke appear to get sucked into the book that Espella had been holding onto earlier. After that, there's an incident and she's accused of theft and assault. Now Phoenix actually gets to defend someone in court. Unfortunately for him, it's all last minute and he knows nothing about the case and must figure everything out in court. In the end, he's able to prove Espella's innocence. After the trial, Phoenix and Maya also appear to get sucked into the book. Layton and Luke wake up in a covered wagon on their way to town, while Phoenix and Maya end up with false memories of working at a bakery for 5 years for some reason. And this is how Phoenix Wright and Herschel Layton meet. In a bakery. Well, now I know where to go when I need to team up with someone for my adventures, but the question is, will I get kicked out for not buying anything? Anyways, Layton ends up investigating town with Luke and Espella, who would run off because of an errand. There's an interesting mystery they got to investigate this time around. Someone known as the storyteller writes stories which become true, and these stories have resulted with Espella being accused of being a witch later on. After Espella runs off, Layton and Luke head back to the bakery, and it's later revealed that Espella has been arrested and is being held on trial for witchcraft, and she requested Phoenix to represent her. And this is when Phoenix realizes he was never actually a baker and that he is a defense attorney. In court, he has to go up against Inquisitor Zacharias Barnum, who is usually praised in town for sentencing the accused witches to their deaths via a pit of fire. I don't know what they're screaming about. Burning alive is fun, especially if you're covered in gasoline. And then there's the judge, who looks and acts a lot like the normal Ace Attorney judge, but is a bit more serious. Anyways, it's up to Phoenix to save her, but he can't do it alone. Professor Layton interrupts the trial before a verdict is passed down. And this is pretty much the game. Investigating the town of Labyrinthia and defending accused witches in court. In the end, it's not the greatest game in the world, but it's still pretty good. At least, to me it is. For the most part, it's written very well, and the characters seem like themselves and aren't ruined like a certain other game I won't mention. However, the game's final moments drag on much longer than they need to, and even using up that much time don't clear up all of the plot holes created when the mystery is solved. Like most Layton games, there are plot holes that won't really be plot holes if you think about them. For example, knowing who's in power in the Layton universe will help with one of them in this game. Unfortunately, not all can easily be explained. Once you beat the game, you unlock 12 DLC episodes where the characters break the fourth wall a lot, solve puzzles, and go into a bit more detail about a couple of the mysteries from the game. You'll also unlock artwork, a music room, the ability to rewatch the game's cutscenes, and a voice clip room. Not that exciting really, but every Layton game has one of them. It's nothing more than a few voice clips from several characters that you can listen to. Honestly, Etrian Odyssey Untold was better about this because you can listen to all recorded voice clips in the game. The characters in this game were written pretty well, and I don't care who says they lack personality. I mean, how can you say that when we got characters like Suicidal Bitch, Swordman, the Asshole, My Waifu, this jackass, and more? Each character animation is very fitting to the characters they were animated for. Graphically, it's nice for a 3DS game. The soundtrack for the game also happens to be fantastic, and one of my favorites for both franchises. One complaint people have about this game is how easy it is. So let me ask, how is that a problem? It actually makes sense that this would be an easier entry for both franchises. It wasn't made exclusively for veterans of both franchises, you know? I like to think of it as a bridge from one franchise to another. It's a way to get Professor Layton fans into Ace Attorney and Ace Attorney fans into Professor Layton. Making it really challenging would be unreasonable and could possibly frustrate a few players to the point where they'll stay away from the other franchise. In other words, it being easy helps make it a good entry point for both franchises. My biggest problem, though, is they could have balanced everything better. Everything is more on the Layton side in this game, which on its own isn't too much of a problem, but it has caused some problems with how the game runs. For example, saving. In the investigation parts of the game, you can save and load right up from the point you saved. However, in court, it does not load right up from where you saved. It will load from a certain point, like the start of the trial, start of a testimony, start of a cross-examination, or other key moments. I do like how you can solve a puzzle in your puzzle index and disregard the trial entirely, though. I'm not really a fan of all the voice acting, it just feels out of place and at some points cringeworthy. There are voices I liked, such as Layton's, Luke's, Barnum's, Maya's, and Phoenix's. Luke actually uses his UK voice this time around in the US release, and it's miles better than his usual US voice. Phoenix was voiced by Trevor White instead of someone who'd voiced Phoenix before, but I still think his voice works well. And Maya, this is the first time anyone's voiced her. Anyways, while this crossover isn't perfect, it still manages to be one of my favorite Ace Attorney games and Professor Layton games. Heck, I'd even say it's one of my favorite 3DS games. The review is over. Isn't that nice? If you liked what you saw, how about subscribing and giving the video a thumbs up? I also make other videos. You can watch them if you want. If you want to know when I'm working on a video or I'm in a weird mood, follow me on my social media accounts. Links are in the description below. Done a lot of recording today. My mouth hurts.